Welcome to ATSA's back channel. I am Alejandro Leguizamo, your host, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Katherine, Katie Gotch, on public policy issues. Ms. Gotch has worked in the field of sexual abuse prevention for over 20 years as a clinician, evaluator, trainer, educator, and in the development of evidence-informed public policy. She maintains a private practice, Integrated Clinical and Correctional Services, which provides specialized clinical and consultation services related to individuals with sexual behavior problems and other forms of abusive or violent behavior. She currently serves as the Public Policy Executive Board member for ATSA and as the Voluntary Executive Director of NPEIV. She frequently provides training to correctional agencies, treatment providers, policymakers, and other community partners on sexual abuse-specific assessment, management, and treatment, static and dynamic risk, public policy, public engagement, and related topics. She is a certified Static 99R, Stable and Acute 2007 trainer. Please help me welcome Ms. Gotch.
Good. Do you want me to put on something?
So, hi, Katie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Alejandro. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thank you for joining us. This should be a good conversation about public policy, which in many ways scares the living daylights out of me. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have a conversation with you about it. So you are the chair of the Public Policy Committee.
Yes, I have served as the public policy chair for the ATSA Executive Board since August of 2016. I just realized I'm going into like 7.5 years or something like that.
Ooh.
Yeah, so it's been a while. And before that, I did work as the coordinator of public affairs for a period of time in which I supported the Public Policy Committee. And yeah, the ATSA Public Policy Committee has always been a very active committee and a lot of work products coming out of it.
Yeah. So what does the committee do?
So there are 4 main pillars in ATSA, and informed public policy is one of them. And so what the Public Policy Committee is tasked to do is to essentially move forward ATSA's policy agenda as outlined within the strategic plan, which in a really simple nutshell just means evidence-informed, evidence-based public policy and ensuring the incorporation of evidence-informed decision-making, promoting the use of research and evidence in policy and legislative development, and addressing and tackling and educating our collaborative partners, particularly the legislature, the community, the media, about what the research actually says and what effective policy can do to prevent sexual abuse.
This is a very, very important activity for the organization. What are some examples of some of the work that you have been involved with, and what has been the reaction from those outside stakeholders?
Well, most recently, I can say registration reform has always been something that the Public Policy Committee has been addressed and tackling for easily the past 10 plus years. Jill Levinson, Chris Labanov-Rostovsky were former chairs and very much drove a lot of that. And so more recently in 2020, we actually finished up our most recent kind of large scale project, which was comprehensive evidence-informed recommendations for registration reform at both the adult and for youth. And ATSA actually came out with the position that youth should not be required to register. And then there were recommendations about better incorporation and individualization of what we know works within registration and community notification within the adult paper. So there was a lot about incorporation of risk need tools, making sure that policies weren't one size fits all, because I think that's a really large area within the public policy arena, is that a policy will be passed, a legislation will be passed, and it is passed on emotion rather than data or research. Or if the research isn't there at the time, the legislation is passed, but then it takes us decades in order to shift it with when the research becomes available. So you see both of those kind of push and pull in the policy arena. And so some of the big work that ATSA has been involved in has been the registration reform, community notification reform, as well as, residence restrictions. We participate in amicus briefs pretty regularly with regards to certain court cases. And there are what we call legacy issues where the board has always had a position on. And then there might be some new topics that pop up that we address as a board before moving forward. But some other areas have just really been focusing on media engagement is another component of the Public Policy Committee, which I know people don't think about, but public engagement is a component of public policy and public legislative kind of work, that policy arena. And so we actually have the Public Policy Committee has the main committee, and then we have a standing subcommittee, which is our public communications subcommittee. And that subcommittee is tasked with more of that media engagement, public communications. How do we translate research and the data and recommendations into layperson language? How do we communicate to differing professional entities and related collaborative partners and the public about the work that we do? So, for example, the registration reform, these are very comprehensive documents that are like, 20 to 30 pages long. We also have 2 to 3 page summaries for lay people. So people who want to know the information and the recommendations without having to delve into those big, huge documents that are more designed for professionals like you and I.
And has there been a reception on these papers on the registration differences?
Yes, oftentimes the work products that are coming out of the Public Policy Committee and ATSA in general will not only be used by the membership, they'll also be used by collaborative partners to help educate. So I know that the registration reform documents, I got direct input that they were used in several different states and were helpful at moving forward some positive policy changes with regards to that. And it's not just registration reform and those types of things. It's anything related to individuals convicted of sexual crimes or those at risk to abuse and the policies that might impact them. Currently, the Public Policy Committee is underway. We're about a year into a rather large-scale project on evidence-informed decision-making. So we are focused on creating toolkits that will help guide different collaborative partners and stakeholders in incorporating evidence-informed decision-making within the entire continuum of the legal process for individuals convicted of sexual crimes. Right now, we're focused only on adults to start, and then our goal is to shift to juveniles next, but we wanted to get the adult together. And these toolkits are essentially being developed to help facilitate and provide easy to use resources for prosecutors, judges, law enforcement, as well as legislators, the public, all the stakeholder groups that are involved, and really highlighting the importance of utilization of evidence to inform our public policies. because so many of our public policies, at least that are applied to individuals convicted of sexual crimes, oftentimes actually are counterproductive. They have the unintended consequence, right, of increasing potential recidivism risk rather than decreasing by destabilizing people's basic kind of hierarchy of needs. If you don't have housing, you can't find food, you can't find employment. Very little else can be targeted if you're not able to meet those basic needs. And so it has that unintended consequence. And so that's part of what we really promote and focus on, is ensuring that the policies are in alignment with what the research tells us, so that they actually are doing what they're intending to do, which is to prevent sexual abuse.
And one of the things is that this is such an emotionally laden topic or area that it is difficult to communicate research-based information to a public that is very freaked out about this and has many preconceptions about it, unless they know somebody that has engaged in this behavior. Yeah, I actually had a student whose sister was involved with a man that had committed a sexual offense as a juvenile. And as we know, juveniles don't tend to continue offending and offend for very different reasons from adults. So the idea that juveniles should be registering really doesn't make sense, given that very few of them offend as adults. And also sometimes the research may have like really funky results. For example, I'm reading a book on masculinity, and they touched on research about the use of sex dolls and robots, and including those that are children, for those who are sexually aroused by children. And in the research, they found that actually having that outlet led to them having less fantasies about children in general. And it's like, okay, but then when I was reading it, I had to do a double take, like, okay, so are we going to have like just like sex dolls for, okay, I have these feelings. Here's a sex doll for you.
Yeah, no, the sex doll and I actually was interviewed about by Vice. This was when I was the coordinator of public affairs for ATSA in 2013. And it was about the potential use of robots as sexual. And it was just interesting. Because I really think, I'll go back to what Michael Cito says on this topic, is we don't have any research. And I know the study you're talking about, actually, I read it as well. And there is some methodological, areas of gray areas within that research study, because it was self-report, right? So we don't have a lot outside of what was being reported. But what Michael said back in the day, back then, because we were talking about it, was essentially, we don't know. We don't know, because the research hasn't been done, and the research likely never will be done, because we cannot be like, we're going to give you guys child sex dolls and we're going to do this and not do. There's so many ethics with that. But that's, I mean, those are great examples of things that, like you said, we have these policies, we create these things, and then we apply them across the board to everybody. But what is the goal, and what is the intended outcome for that? And as we know, registration, and I should note, registration and community notification are two different policies that are talked about as the same because of how we do them in the United States. And we actually are the only country that does registration and community notification in the fashion that we do. I wrote a book chapter with Kieran McCartan on that a couple years ago. And so we really are, it's like an example of American exceptionalism, but not in the best way. And what's fascinating about that too is that Patrick Lussier and colleagues in 2022 looked at sexual recidivism rates in Canada and talked about how in like the 1990s, we kind of split. We both in North America were at this more punitive based approach. We had a sexual predator laws, and Canada did as well. And then they looked at some of the issues and they went into much more of that rehabilitative focus with application of the risk need responsivity principles and focusing on treatment interventions and community supervision, whereas the US remained the same. We remained in that very punitive punishment. And what we've seen is huge, well, mass incarceration, all of that we could go into, which is not just related to individuals convicted of sexual crimes. But what this big meta-analytic study showed was that in Canada, sexual recidivism rates have dropped approximately 60% since the 1970s, and they have remained the same in the United States. So what does that tell us about what works? And what we know works is holistic, humanistic, individualized, empirically based, research, evidence-informed, all of that. Not just let's lock them up and throw away the key, because all of those people are, almost not all, but the majority will at some point return to the community. Even the individuals who have been incarcerated for 30 plus years, at some point, they will return to the community many times. Very rarely are people in prison for life, nor should most people be in prison for life because of what we know about desistance and all of those pieces as well. So yes, all of that is at the intersection of what the Public Policy Committee deals with and addresses. And I know I love the fact that you started this with public policy, like kind of scares you a little bit, because I'm always encouraging people, because I have zero formal training and experience in public policy. I kind of fell into this in 2005, I think it was, or something along those lines. I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Don't worry.
So I fell into this public policy stuff in about 2005 as a frontline clinician. I am an evaluator and former treatment provider. Like, I am a forensic evaluator and trainer and educator, that kind of thing. And policy became like this huge chunk of my work because I saw that everything that happened up there impacts everything we do at the front line. So if you have, excuse my language, shitty policies up there, it impacts our ability to do good work at the forefront. I'm sorry, I have a new iPad that I haven't figured out how to mute yet, because my phone is always on mute. So hopefully you can edit that out.
Or not. I don't know.
Or not. We'll just have the random ringing in the background. But yeah. So I always encourage everybody, because we are all agents of change. We all have the ability to impact where we work, what we do. And at a minimum, we have the ability to impact on a client by client basis. And it may not feel like that's related to public policy and stuff like that, but it is in its own way, because it's just, policy is its own beast. I will say that.
The dealing with kind of like political entities, that's the thing that kind of like, I'm glad that people are willing to do that. I do have more of a, I mean, the purpose of these podcasts too, it's out there and it's open, so it's not only ATSA members that have access. Any random person can find them and listen to them. And the goal is for everybody to hear from experts, good information about this topic, because there's so much out there that is going to be anecdotal and is going to be very laden with all kinds of feelings about it, because individuals that are convicted of sex offenses are seen as these monsters, even by some treatment providers.
Mhm.
Whereas that, there are fathers, our brothers, our children, and that's where the compassion needs to come in order to be able to provide them with services that are actually going to make a difference, so that we can stop those cycles of sexual abuse.
Yes, and that is a huge barrier to public policy work in this arena. Individuals convicted of sexual crimes are society's chosen pariahs, and they have been for a number of years. And this is reflected by, you see criminal justice reforms happening, and the one population that will be excluded are individuals convicted of sexual crimes. You will have a criminal justice initiative or a new reentry program, and the one population that will be excluded from those reentry opportunities will be individuals convicted of sexual crimes, because there's so many myths and there are so many misunderstandings about sexual abuse. And I very much view myself as a preventionist, and I come from the mindset and the foundation that sexual abuse is a public health issue. And so that is always the lens that I view sexual abuse through, and all forms of sexual violence. And when you have that shift, it helps you understand the broader prevention and primary prevention opportunities that we frequently miss, particularly in this country, because we tend to be so individualistic focused versus community focused. And we tend to be retribution and punishment focused versus rehabilitative and reformation focused. And so how do we do better? How do we do better? And how do we incorporate and recognize the importance of the holistic approaches? And how do we start? We can do lip service to many things. I think we've gotten really good at doing the risk and need aspects of R&R, but responsivity still is so far behind.
Oh yeah.
That type of thing where responsivity it's there. People will say that they're doing it, but they don't really understand what that means. They don't really grasp what it means to incorporate trauma-informed practices into your work, or more of that holistic, because it's easier for it to be us over there and them over here. And so part of what I think the Public Policy Committee does focus on is breaking down a lot of those myths and doing it in a way that is approachable and understandable by not just professionals, but by the lay public as well.
Yeah.
And the media. We cannot overstate the impact of the media. And and the messaging that the media gives with regards to sexual violence, and just the words they use, and that's another piece the Public Policy Committee is actively focused on, is that media resources being a resource, and making sure that ATSA's at the forefront and a known entity that people can reach out to for real information. Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, if anybody's watching who is a billionaire, we could use some money in order to do like public service, ads or something, like the New Zealand public ads about online pornography and young Kiwis learning about sex through porn and how that distorts things, and other types of online safety. But I would love to have those commercials that provide like actual good information, and it could be done in a humorous way, or in a way that is going to get the message across in a way that can be understood and appreciated. But unfortunately, we don't have that where the government could get involved in order to provide factual information, because there are plenty of people that are not, they cease to contribute to society because of all of these restrictions, And I always go back. I saw a presentation at the Massachusetts conference many, many years ago. And this was with child molesters who had offended. And some of the questions in the research involve, what do you think you committed this offense? And for one of them, it was a second offense or subsequent offense. And part of the rationale that the person brought up was that he offended because of the police. And my initial thought, and actually all of us present were like, oh yeah, sure, that's a good one, kind of thing. And then realizing afterwards that the increased stress from harassment or from not being able to live somewhere and perhaps being homeless and being having the tents taken down because people don't want them there, increases the stress that could then lead to potentially to a reoffense. So after much thinking about it, it kind of like, well, it is possible. But we don't have the policies to be able to incorporate people back into the community in a way that is going to allow for assistance, like the good old research, a support network, relationships, working with those relationships.
Employment, housing, having food, basic needs met. And we do. And particularly in the United States, we have created a number of additional barriers to reentry for our population, and barriers that, as I noted earlier, they don't reduce recidivism risk. They don't prevent sexual abuse. They're based on myths rather than facts. And they have the unintended consequences of actually potentially increasing an individual's recidivism risk rather than decreasing it. And that's where it gets a little crazy making. And I will note, the policy world is not for everybody. You have to be pretty resilient, because you take 5 steps forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 4 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I could keep going like that. It is just a back and forth process, and you will see things that are positive movements, and then a new administration will come in and it'll all change. So it is an uphill battle. I'm not going to say it isn't, but I just always want to encourage people not to be afraid of policy, though, and think, ooh, it's this like thing, because we impact policy as day-to-day clinicians. We impact all of that with regards to how we work, how we revamp our own internal policies within our organizations, and then the big scale. And we impact it every time we educate anybody. And I think that that's an important piece, is those of us who do this work, it is a part of our job, I feel, to educate on what the facts say, whether it's to, me testifying in front of the legislature, or educating a judge in a courtroom about what the research says, or having that conversation with the receptionist at my eye doctor's office when she asks what I do for a living. And and it's funny, because a lot of people will tell me that they get negative responses. And I'm always like, it's how you, I have always framed, I work in the field of sexual abuse prevention, specifically with perpetration. And it more elicits conversations versus, oh my God. I mean, you say I work with sex offender. First off, let's have a conversation about first person language. But it's that piece of what we do is just as important as anybody else in the prevention arena. And in some ways, I think our work is even more important, because we're able to be with people who have harmed and caused harm and still view them as individuals and human beings. And that's who they are. And I should note, having bad policy just isn't in our, arena, right? We have bad policies all over the place, but in our arena, we focus
Yeah.
on improving the practices and making sure it's not based on myths or emotions.
So
And yeah.
yeah, I'll remember, because these questions of like changing not only public policy but societal norms, it takes a lot of time. It takes a long chain, and the little that we can do as individuals, in some ways, we can a tsunami is made out of drops of water.
Mm-hmm.
Just lots of them. I think because part of it is the transforming the culture that is patriarchal, that is hegemonic with there's traditional masculinities conducive to sexual aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it involves a transformation that it is tremendously difficult to enact. But we do have the goal that there are matriarchal societies where there is no sexual aggression, or actually physical aggression, domestically. So it is possible. So there's a goal, and little by little, perhaps we can get there.
We can hope. And one thing I wish we were more open to in the United States is looking at effective policies and things that have been working in other countries instead
yeah.
of that's a big thing of mine. And one of my goals with the Public Policy Committee too was bringing in more of that international perspective, because we have countries who are doing things like registration really quite well. And in a rehabilitative New Zealand and specifically one of the states in Australia, Victoria, thank you. I can remember. And I did a presentation in 2019 with a colleague from New Zealand, a colleague from Australia, and Kieran McCartan from the UK. And we were taught, and my portion of the presentation was learn from our mistakes, registration and notification in the United States. And, what they do in other countries, we could learn from if we were open to learning outside of our own little siloed America. And I think that that's something I wish that we were more open to in this country, because
New Zealand, they're doing great things. Norway, they do great things as well. I don't know about people that have committed sex offenses, but there's and this is not like research based, it's actually from a Netflix show, but it's very interesting, about the world's most dangerous prisons. And the maximum security prison in Nicosia, Cyprus. The superintendent of the prison is a human rights attorney that transformed the prison from being a complete mess, where they were like the guards would like break bones of the inmates with disturbing regularity. She upped the training budget from 6,000 euros a year to 200,000, and transformed the prison so that at this point there's very little aggression there. If there is any problems and they have to put hands on, they do it in a way that is actually very impersonal, in that, this is not personal. We're just going to keep you safe and keep us safe. And they don't use uniforms. They wear regular clothes, and they do all kinds of different things. So when they get out, they're actually better prepared, and also they're treated better. So there can be a lot of corrective work while the person is in prison, so that they're better off when they get out.
And that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about, the statement hurt people is very true. Very rarely are we working with individuals who come from really healthy backgrounds. There's some level of trauma, adversity, things like that with our clients. And when do they no longer get to be a survivor? When are they only suddenly a perpetrator? And so how do we look at individuals across in that holistic, humanistic, and their own adversity does not mitigate the harm caused, but it provides the context for maybe how they got there.
Yeah.
And also provides the context for how do we intervene in an effective way with this individual.
Yeah.
And recognizing that everyone has the capacity to make change if they choose to. And not everyone's ready to. And there are definitely a small percentage of individuals who need to be removed from the community due to the risk that they present. But that is not the majority of individuals. And we also re-traumatize and actually many times make people worse through how we handle them in the prison system.
Yeah.
And we further traumatize, and we're releasing. And then when we don't provide any kind of rehabilitative, educational, vocational treatment, kind of specialized services, we're releasing people who are sometimes more traumatized and more broken because of the prison experience than they were before they went in.
Yeah.
And so how is that preventing any kind of criminal activity? Let alone sexual abuse, if we're not addressing the root causes of why these behaviors happen in the first place for that person. So, and I mean, we could talk about that for days.
I know. I know. And actually, we should wrap it up. To be continued. Very interesting conversations. If you're listening to this, go to ATSA.com. I'll repeat that a little bit later on. But in order to learn about this, I never read a chart from somebody that was convicted of a sex offense and didn't go like, oh, of course he committed this offense, because their histories are very, very complicated. And so, well, I want to thank you very much for your time and for your wisdom. And I will see you very, very soon.
Yes.
At the board meeting.
Yes, indeed.
Where we will make things to change over the world.
Exactly.
Or at least begin the work.
Continuing the work of those who came before us and those who will come after us as well, right?
That's right.
Thank you.
That's
happy to be here today and happy to chat.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today. I am Alejandro Leguizamo for the Association for the Treatment and Prevention of Sexual Abuse. You can visit us at ATSA.com for a wealth of information on these issues, the treatment and prevention of sexual abuse. Take care.